Starting this session lying on the floor on your back, if that's okay for you. Some of it could also be done seated. I'll suggest some modifications as we go along, reiterating as always to take care of yourself, to take modifications offered if they seem better than the full practice, and listen to your body. In this session, we're going to look at a particular segment of the body, which is a very pivotal segment of the body, the pelvis, and the muscles around the pelvis and that run through the pelvis to attach basically the legs to the spine are extremely pivotal for our postures in sitting and in standing, and all of our daily movements from walking to bending over, reaching up, squatting, possibly sitting on the floor for meditation, or being on the floor to play with pets or children. And if we have discomfort in the pelvis, that sometimes radiates out or is related to discomforts in other areas of the body, commonly the knees, anywhere in the spine. The body is like a collection of segments. Ruthie Fraser in the book Stack Your Bones says the body is an aggregate of segments. And they need to be in relationship with each other, which is smooth. One of my teachers, Pete Blackaby, likens it to the body being like an orchestra, and there's all these different muscles, joints, bones, connective tissues, that all need to be playing in harmony with each other, and they all need to be in tune. And if one of the instruments or players is not in tune, is not in alignment with the rest of the orchestra, the whole thing can start to sound pretty awful. What also happens, we then tend to notice the part that's not in tune or not in alignment. It can start to grate on us, become really noisy. And then all we can think about when we walk is that sore knee or that stiff hip. And it affects our whole sense of self to some extent. Another teacher once said, who had a knee injury, she said, I just became this big, grumpy old knee. It was like that was taking over my thoughts and my awareness and my very existence. So sometimes it's just a niggle, sometimes it's something that feels like a more substantial thing in our sense of our body mind. And the pelvis is very pivotal in that whole arrangement. Maybe we could liken it to the drum that sets the beat for the piece of music. And often working on the pelvis and all the muscles that organize the position of the pelvis, the dynamic movement of the pelvis when we move, as well as its position at any given moment, can be very instrumental in being part of other kind of issues in the body, like the knees and the back. So working on this area might have unexpected benefits, which I'd like you to watch out for. So starting by paying attention to how your body is placed on the floor now. Maybe you've chosen to straighten your legs or bend your knees, and whichever one is more comfortable is already telling you something about your pelvis. Maybe both are comfortable. Maybe one is more comfortable than the other. So, if we are more comfortable on our back with bent knees, there might be something there in the muscles that organize the lumbar spine, that link to the hips and the thighs, the psoas muscles, that are a little bit out of balance or a bit on the tight side. Or there might be a habit we have of arching our back a lot that needs some relief. It could also have to do with the hip flexors, of which the psoas is a part, and them being a bit shortened. If you're sitting a lot or squatting a lot, bending over a lot, then sometimes straightening the legs also creates a tension in the lower back area. So noticing what you've done and perhaps why, if you know. And if you started off with your knees bent, then straightening them out now and seeing how that is now. You can do that one by one leg at a time. Or vice versa, if you started with legs straight, bend your knees now and notice what that's like. Being aware of your pelvis, your legs, your hips, and your lower back. Then for the first part of this sequence, this sort of pelvic health sequence, you can use a ball, a massage ball, a tennis ball, a bouncy ball, a golf ball, whatever you might have. Or this is a miracle ball from the Miracle Ball Method. You can Google that and order one of those. They're a little bit bigger and softer, which can be more comfortable. And if you've got different sizes, you can experiment with different sizes. From semi-supine, with your knees bent, inviting you to roll to one side a little bit or lift your buttocks off the ground in a mini bridge and place the ball underneath your right buttock. And you can move it around a little bit and see, where does it feel useful in terms of a bit of a massage and comfortable enough. And you can also do this sequence without a ball. You could place a hand under your buttock or a fist, if that feels okay, to have a bit of feedback, or be on the floor. And then placing your hands on your lower belly so that your little fingers are resting in the hip crease, that area between your thigh and your belly. And then gently breathing out, feeling the belly contract backwards. Breathing in, feeling the belly expand. And as you exhale, allowing your pelvis to be heavy on the ground and rest on the ball. You might want to shift your feet a bit to help with this relaxation. And then letting your heel slide away, your right heel slide away. So you're straightening your leg and then letting the leg relax. And it will probably roll out to the side slightly. Noticing the angle at which it might relax, the angle of your foot, the rotation at your hip. And then with your fingers or the heel of your hand, you can massage the front of your hip, particularly in that hip crease area. So you might be able to feel your hip flexors there. The psoas muscle crosses in front of the hip bone there and attaches to the inside of the thigh bone near the top of the thigh. And then there's another muscle that connects to the front of the thigh. And you could also very slightly lift your knee, bend your knee and relax again. And you'll probably feel those muscles engage. That's a bit like walking. And you can feel their thickness. They're almost like thick ropes. And then relax again and massage. Press gently down on those muscles. Breathing out, relaxing, letting the leg be heavy. And then sliding your heel back in towards you. So we're working a bit with this idea of sliding and the resistance of the mat, which engages some of the muscles in the thigh and hip and the core. So we're also working on a bit of strength in a really gentle way. And then bringing the right knee above the right hip and lifting your foot up to knee level. So your knee is at a 90-degree angle. And then bringing your right hand to your knee and guiding your knee into a small circle, keeping the right angle at the knee. That just engages some of your thigh muscles. There's some help from the hand as well. And then going the other way. And then changing direction again, making the circle a bit bigger. If it gets uncomfortable with the ball, feel free to just lift up, put the ball in a slightly different spot. Experiment. You can let go of the knee and move the leg without the aid of your hand. That's a bit more stimulating for the inner and outer thigh muscles. If that feels too strong, that creates a lot of sort of gripping around your hip, then bring your hand back. And then bringing your knee back to above your hip. And straighten your leg a little bit, maybe not all the way. This can feel quite intense depending on where you have the ball. So if there's a lot of tightness in the muscles of the buttocks, it could affect your hamstrings, and the ball could press on the hamstring attachments. If it's quite close to your sitting bone, that's more likely as well. So you might feel this is a little intense, more intense than usual on your hamstrings. So approaching with gentleness again and an explorative attitude. How does this feel? And then bending your knee and popping your foot back down on the floor. And for this next one, you may want to move the ball again to a different spot. And maybe it's just getting a little bit tired of being in that particular spot, or it feels a bit sore. And then letting your right knee go out to the side and back like a half cobbler. Going into cobbler and back up. Keep being aware of your exhalation and encouraging the pelvis to be heavy. And with this one as well, it can sometimes feel useful to experiment with where your foot is, maybe a bit further away from the pelvis or a bit closer. And if you can find a way to let your knee relax out to the side, I'm just going to move my ball a little bit further out to the side. That's more comfortable for me. And I've moved my foot as well. If there's a way of resting in half cobbler with the ball, then you can do that. Maybe allowing your hand to massage your hip again, or stroke your thigh to encourage relaxation. Encourage the body to let go. And then bringing the knee back up. And rolling over a bit or lifting the hips to remove the ball. And then noticing the sensations in the back of the pelvis, in the right hip, and any difference between right and left hip. In what way does your right hip feel different? And is that a positive difference in some way? In my experience, there's a sense of almost noticing my right side less because it's more comfortable, if that makes sense. It feels really, really comfortable compared to the hip I haven't worked on. And I'm noticing the slight discomfort in the hip I haven't worked on, and a kind of tension and grippiness. So that's disappeared on the side that I've worked on. And whatever your experience is absolutely good and right, because that's yours. So we'll go to the other side, placing the ball under the other side. Again, playing around a bit, maybe you have it close to your sit bone or closer to your back, to your lower back, or out to the side. You've got a kind of bony bit on the side of the hip and at the sitting bone. So sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable to be too close to those. And sometimes it feels really useful to be close to the sitting bone where the piriformis is, if you've heard of that muscle, can be a contributor to sciatic pain. Tightness in the piriformis. So experiment, where might it feel useful? And then again, relaxing there, focusing on the breath, moving the belly, the weight of your pelvis on the exhale, releasing down. aware of the hip crease. After a few breaths, letting your left heel slide away, letting your leg relax. If it feels okay, massaging the hip flexors in the hip crease area. It can be a gentle stroke. A little bit of pressure might encourage the hip to relax more. See what works for you. Pay attention in a kind and curious way. Noticing the rotation at your hip, the angle at which your foot rests in relation to the floor. And letting your hand and your arm relax and your leg relax for a moment. And then sliding your heel back towards your pelvis. And lift the knee to above the pelvis with your knee at 90-degree angle. Connect your left hand to your knee and draw a small circle with your knee. Move the ball if it feels like it could be in a better place for this movement. And also in the circling, there might be a part of the movement that feels particularly useful or nice. For me right now, it's with my knee a little bit closer in towards me. So you could go back and forth through that part of the circle. Respond to your findings. A good massage therapist would kind of feel what's going on in the body of their client and adapt to what they find. Not just going with some rote technique. But responding to what's happening in the moment in the client's body. So you are now your own massage client, as it were. And then you can choose to make the circles a bit bigger if that feels useful. You could let go of your knee if that feels useful, maybe just for 1 or 2 circles. And if you feel gripping in those hip flexors, then it might be better to use your hand for support. And don't assume that it's the same as your other leg and hip. It might be quite different. You might take a different approach on this side. And then bringing your knee back to above your hip. If you feel any gripping, you might like to rest for a moment, stretch the leg out, and then bring the knee back above the hip for the hamstring stretch. Seeing if you can straighten the leg comfortably with the ball still there. And then bringing the foot back down. And maybe moving the ball to a different spot. And then going into the half cobbler. Dynamically, first of all, so letting the knee release out to the side and bringing it back. Changing the position of your foot, if that feels helpful. Changing position of the ball, if that feels helpful. Staying in touch with your exhalation and the intention to release through the back of the hip and to relax the leg. And seeing if there's a way to go into a resting half cobbler. Maybe move your foot around. Can you relax in that posture? Is your whole body relaxed? And then bringing the knee back up, either rolling to the right a little bit to remove the ball or lift your hips. And noticing how this whole area of your pelvis feels and your lower back with your knees bent. And then slide one of your legs away along the floor. Notice how this hip feels now. And slide it back. Slide the other leg away. Notice how everything feels on that side. And then slide back. And then sliding both legs away. Noticing how your posture feels now. Not just the hips and lower back, but everything. And then sliding your heels back again. Hug your knees in towards you. So we're going to do a bit more of this sliding, and it's quite nice to have the resistance of the mat for that. So that builds a bit more awareness and strength. I'm actually wearing sort of non-slip socks, and with my mat, it's a little bit too non-slip. So if you've got something like that going on where your mat keeps kind of coming with your heels or whatever, then you can come off your mat, take your feet off your mat, or take those non-slip socks off. And we'll start again this part of the sequence with the knees bent. And then sliding your heels away, basically to Shavasana, the relaxation pose. So where both legs are straight and relaxed, so your heels roll out to the side. And at that point, your arms can fold outwards, the palms up, resting the backs of the hands on the floor. And then coming back to the starting position of bridge, basically, sliding your heels back and turning your palms down. And doing that a few more times and noticing how you do this. What are the angles of your legs as you do this? When do you rotate your leg in the hip? Are you using your core to bring your heels in towards you? Are you doing something with your breathing to facilitate it? Is it a little bit difficult to slide because your mat is quite rough or sticky? So maybe you're doing a little bit of lifting. So you may be employing some strategies to create these movements. Can you notice what they are? And then coming back to resting for a moment, either with the knees bent or the legs straight. Then we'll break down some of the possible strategies of these movements. And you can try the different ones in a more specific way. So strategy 1 from bridge pose would be to stay with the hips and the knees and the feet in alignment as we slide away. So in other words, the kneecaps keep pointing up towards the ceiling as you slide your heels away. And then you roll out. So you roll your palms up and roll your legs out at the last possible moment. And then as you come back, you roll the legs back onto the heels, roll the palms of the hands down, and then slide your heels back. And you might be a bit more inclined then to engage your core. Then take a breath in, and then you could exhale, engaging your core, letting your heels slide away. And then breathe in and relax into Shavasana. Next exhale, rotate onto the heels and the palms of the hands and draw back, engaging your core, relax and breathe in. Doing this a couple more times. Noticing also this might keep the position of your pelvis fairly stable to slide on the exhale. And then there might be a bit more of a curve in your spine as you relax. On the movement, on the effort, the tummy muscles are stabilizing the pelvis. Then the other strategy would be to start from the knees bent, to turn the palms up and let the knees go wide and then slide. So then you're sliding on the outsides of the feet. And by the time your legs straighten, you're already in corpse pose. Again, recommend sliding on the exhale to engage the core. Slide in and then bring the knees together and turn the palms down. Doing this a few more times, noticing how this feels. So opening first and then sliding. Staying with the hips rotated out to slide back and then bring the knees up. And the chances are that when you were first doing this without specific instructions, when I asked you to notice what strategy you use, you were doing a bit of both. You were probably going into rotation about halfway or something like that. Having a little rest. Maybe one of these strategies felt more useful, like more strengthening than the other, more comfortable, maybe more familiar. And then just doing a couple more where you do it a bit more your way, in a way that feels good for you, the most supportive. And then having another rest, either with your knees bent or your legs straight. What feels best now? Then let's hug the knees in towards the chest for a moment. Take a little rock from side to side, letting your head roll. And then coming up into sitting for a moment. Noticing how it is now to sit on the floor. So these are very useful for the seated postures, especially sitting on the floor. You could try cross-legged. You could try the stick pose, wide-legged seated. Noticing your pelvis and your connection with the ground. And then coming up to standing. Especially if it's quite challenging to sit on the floor. Short periods of time and trying different positions is helpful. Build up from there. And the next session will be a bit more focused on sitting. And now noticing your standing, having a sense of these different segments lining up from the feet to the ankles, the knees, maybe having a bit of a wriggle here to again be aware of the relationship between the ankles, the knees, the pelvis, the hips. And then letting the pelvis settle on the legs. Being aware of your weight from side to side and front to back. Feeling the waist, the rib cage, the shoulders, the width of the body, head and neck. The length of the body through all these segments. And the width. And then also a sense of the depth of the body from front to back. And how does it feel now, this orchestra of the body in standing? Does it feel fairly harmonious? Are there any false notes? And then taking a walk. You could walk forwards and backwards. That can be interesting. Walk around your space. If you've got the room, you can change pace to a bit faster. It usually requires a bit more than 2 or 3 steps to get a pace going. See how much space you've got, and then notice the orchestra of the body in walking. From that perspective of, does everything seem in tune? Or is there still a player that's kind of slightly out of tune or not really in time with the rest of the orchestra? And then each time we do a practice like this, we can make this comparison. Is there any positive change, an increase in ease? And that will help us to embed it in our nervous system, in our neural map. Oh, this feels easier, and that's what that feels like. And also motivates us, hopefully, to keep doing the practice that we notice really benefit our body.